Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome to my channel. Today I'm finally very belatedly getting around to the Contradictions Book Tag, which I was tagged at by Kelly at Books I'm Not Reading all the way back in April. I haven't been ignoring you if you're watching this video. I just, had a lot of other videos and stuff I had to get around to doing first. So anyway, let's just get down with it. Number one, I love this genre but didn't like this book. A Freaking Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I hate this book so much. Just thinking about it just makes me angry. I was like the only dissenting voice when I took a YA young adult literature class at the master's degree level, and I think it was like autumn 2011. Like everyone else in the class and the professor, they were just like raving about this book, and I was like the one voice saying, I don't really like this. This is bad writing, and these are like vulgar words in German. Like actual German speakers aren't tossing them around like cute, like funny, sweet terms of endearment between like romantic partners and parents and children and friends, and it's just like really stupid. Newsflash, this book sucks. I'm going to do a whole video based on a blog post I did ripping this book apart. My blog post was like just so brutally honest and negative. It was rejected for inclusion on the blog conglomerate or whatever. I'm sorry, I'm blanking on the word. It's basically like they collect blog posts about like writing and books and stuff and just like capture them all in like different categories for people to read. And Ink Pageant turned down my blog post on the Book Thief as too demeaning. Well, yet I stand by every single word of that like negative book review. I hate this book so much. Just thinking about that spoilerific newsflash narrator just so many years later, it just really makes me angry. I do not understand why this book is so popular, why so many people like squee all over it, or why they think that newsflash spoilers are like beautiful moving foreshadowing. That's just like giving away pivotal plot points. And the ending, I cannot say enough about how much I just hate this book so much. I just hate it so much. Number two, I rarely read this genre, but I love this book. Now for this one, I put aside two different book reviews, which both were books I had read for various different literature classes I was taking in master's degree level work. One was Lockdown by Walter Dean Myers, which was written in 2010. I absolutely love that book, but even though I usually don't like contemporary at all, particularly contemporary YA, but I ended up absolutely loving this. But I decided I'll just like focus that review maybe for a future video, because I ended up really loving Mr. Myers' writing and books. I've read a number of his other books since then, and I've bought a few also at a local used bookstore. I just cannot say enough about what a wonderful writer he was and just how absolutely marvelous his books are. But I decided to do the second one, which I marked out, called The Skull of Truth by Bruce Coville. And actually Mr. Coville used to live, or maybe he still does, maybe, I'm not quite sure, in Albany, New York, which is where I grew up and where I have lived in for most of my life. Unfortunately, I'm no longer living there. He was a local native son, and he came to speak at my elementary school once. So like it's basically a really cool personal connection with this guy, and I was really delighted to be able to read one of his books when we were doing, I believe it was like a fantasy thing for my middle grade children's literature class. And so The Skull of Truth is about a sixth grader named Charlie Eggleston, and he goes through the local swamp to escape from bullies, and he finds himself in Mr. Elvis's mysterious magic shop. Charlie's a bit creeped out by the store and Mr. leaves and wants to get out of there ASAP. However, the situation is complicated when he inadvertently takes a skull back with him. The skull's name is Yorick, and he carries a sort of reverse curse, wherein everyone in his presence can only speak the truth. I'm sorry for the noise outside. This gets Charlie in a lot more trouble than usual, since he goes from a habitual liar to someone who's far too honest. It also creates some funny moments and scenes at home, as his entire family begins uttering some embarrassing confessions, unflattering opinions, and hidden secrets. Charlie realizes he can use Yorick to save the swamp from being drained by his enemy Mark's father, and smuggles it into a meeting at the library. But after the meeting, when Mark's father has been thoroughly humiliated and discredited, Yorick is missing. Charlie figures out Mark must have taken him and goes over to try to get Yorick back. He's also received orders from talking rats Jerome and Roxanne, on behalf of Mr. Leaves, to take Yorick to the nearby cemetery at midnight. Will Charlie be able to give Yorick to truth, and what important lessons will he take from his experience of honesty? That's roughly for about like ages 12 through 14, but I obviously enjoyed it very much. And I do also recommend Bruce Coville's other books if you love like fantasy and middle grade, or a combination of both, and particularly if you're interested in like a local Albanian. I just really highly recommend him. Number three, I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. Now this is, I thought of Dr. Zhivago. It's not necessarily, I would say, a trope so much. It's just like a setting, obviously, like the Russian history, the Russian Revolution, and also, star-crossed lovers. I first read this for my modern Russian literature class. It was my junior, I want to say junior year, possibly senior year of university, and it was a really, really slow read, actually. Kind of, well, I didn't really DNF it, I just didn't finish it by the end of the class, and I finally went back to it and finished reading it all the way through after I had graduated, maybe like a year or so later, and it like did, you know, eventually start picking up, but I didn't, it never really became like a favorite novel or just like a slow burn. Oh, it's slow at first, but now it gradually picks up, and I did unfortunately DNF'd it. There was a read along with, I think there were 4 women co-hosting it here on BookTube, and I was really surprised. All 4 of the ladies DNF'd it themselves, as they said in their, like, you know, final wrap-up video discussing the book. It was like, this was a different translation which my parents gave me for Hanukkah or my birthday a number of years back. There's still the gift receipt, and I do obviously hope to go back to it. I'm sorry again about the noise, and finish reading it someday, but there's just, as I've mentioned in several videos, there's a lot of problems with it. Like, for example, Boris Leonidovich Pasternak, I absolutely love him as both a person and a poet, but it's just like, it's obvious he was not like a novelist. He needed to get better. Like, a lot of the things, I wouldn't necessarily consider them mistakes. They're just things you do when you're like a newer, more inexperienced writer, and you're just kind of learning how to write. Like, for example, characters constantly show up like 100 or so pages after they were last seen, like, oh, it's you again, and you have nothing to do with the plot, and our meeting has advances absolutely nothing, but oh, here you are, like, just reminding all the readers that you still exist. And a lot of other things, like the first chapter, 2 chapters, are basically just a lot of like info dump. It could have been really good, you know, like fleshing out how the main characters are growing up and exploring their personalities and what different worlds they come from and how that does it for them. But it's just like little vignettes. Oh, this happened, and then that happened, and oh, that was interesting, and it doesn't really advance anything. It's just, you know, kind of there. And again, I think if he had, you know, attempted to write more books or stayed with it longer, he possibly could have become, you know, a much better prose writer, because obviously he was an absolutely marvelous poet. And if you're interested, I do have a video of myself reciting his heartbreaking poem Nobel Prize, I believe he wrote it in 1959, to the very end of his life back in April for National Poetry Month. But I do recommend Boris Leonidovich Pasternak's poems, but unfortunately his one and only novel, it's not really just something that appeals to me, like, personally. Number 4, I hate this trope, but I love this book. And this again is like interpreting trope a bit more loosely, or maybe in its more like traditional old-fashioned sense. It's, you know, the bopping back and forth between different narrators with just like so many different like point of view characters. I mean, obviously I myself tend to write third person omniscient with like many important characters, but when you like bop back and forth, that's not really something I like. And so this was The Watch That Ends the Night by Allan. This was, I discovered it was in the recommended or books for reading. I believe it was the novel and verse section for my YA literature class. This is about Titanic. It takes the point of view of like many different people on board the ship, both like, you know, real people and like fictional characters, for the purpose of like an interesting story. And there's also like the ship's rat also gets point of view like chapters in like the poems and verse, and it was just absolutely so beautiful. I never felt like I was being like dragged back and forth between all these different diverse characters, like, oh, who cares about this person? Do we really have to have, you know, like 20 different characters or however many? But no, it all fits absolutely beautiful together. And I absolutely, you know, love Titanic history. That's one of my like areas of special interest, not like as high up as like, for example, like Russian history or like World War II Holocaust, or just, you know, like general 20th century things like that. But that's absolutely been a fascination and interest of mine for many years. And looking back, I think maybe because the Titanic's remains were finally, you know, discovered and started to be explored when I was in the first grade back in it was discovered in 1985, but it was like 1986 they really like started recovering and like doing some hardcore like research and exploration. So that might have been that, you know, like early association. I have still never seen the 1997 movie Sorry Not Sorry, because there are just like so many historical anachronisms, and I find it like a gigantic insult and slap in the face. They use this like beyond implausible like MTV era love story set in 1912, and that's like the major focus of the film. And basically it's just like, oh, one of history's greatest maritime disasters is just like a minor fluffy backdrop to the love story of this like cabin boy, like a stowaway like steerage passenger, and like an upper class rich girl who in real life would never have met, or if they had, she wouldn't have even considered this dude a material for a lover. But I'm sorry, that's just a rant for a whole other subject. But it just, you know, really makes me angry. If you do want to see a good Titanic film, I highly recommend the 1958 British film A Night to Remember. Really the only like true like major historical inaccuracies that shows the ship like sinking in one piece, but obviously like back then that's what many people believe. Now we know it broke into 2 pieces as it sank. Number 5, I love this author but didn't like this book. The Glass Bead Game by Hermann Hesse, who is my second favorite writer. I did a whole Hermann Hesse themed month back in August, like discussing like general things about him and some of his books. And I've also done videos on several of his books to date. Damien Stepenwolf and Siddhartha, and hopefully I will do some more videos of his books in future, like hopefully when I finally get all my books back out of storage. Now this was only one of Hesse's books, which was, like a chore and a drag and just boring to read, instead of like a delight and just, plowing through it in one sitting, or maybe like 3 days if I'm, just taking my time and not reading so much every single day. It was just like so boring, and I understand he was kind of like doing that, like, life of the mind thing, and it wasn't necessarily intended to be like bang, 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 like fast-paced plot centric book, but it was just like so boring, and I couldn't even like think of like to give a summary all these years later. I obviously remember like the main character Joseph Knecht and the old music master and like Father Jacobus and his buddy Plinio de Signori, but just other than that, it's like I really can't even like give a synopsis. Oh, this happened in this chapter and those were the main events. It was just he's basically like doing his little life of the mind and his like school, and like coming to feel like, oh, I can do like better, find my own path in the outside world. I never even figured out how this like glass bead game is even played. There was no like actual description that let me visualize it. It was just so boring. But to his credit, Hesse does redeem himself at the end. There are these excellent 3 live stories plus a poetry section. It was like, dude, where were you hiding the entire rest of the book? Why didn't you write the actual novel in this vein? I would have loved it so much more. But if you're like getting into Hesse or like interested in exploring more of his books beyond the like the really major like famous popular ones, I would recommend saving Glass Bead Game for very last. It was just like so boring. I cannot like not recommend it enough. Number 6. I previously disliked a book by this author, but I love this book, and dislike is really too strong of a word. I would more say like hard getting into it. Nothing personal against it. As I've mentioned in my blog post, like I read the Betsy Tacy series last year, and I finished it up this year, and it took like until I think the 7th book, Betsy was a junior, to like finally really get into it. It was nothing personal against the characters or like the author or the writing or anything like that. It was just like personally like just removed from me. Like, for example, like Betsy has such like a comfortable upper middle class life, and she loves like social life and boys and stuff like that, and that's just kind of like something was hard for me to relate to, because I was like, this serious like studious like student, and I like cared less about social life and dating and parties and stuff like that, and I grew up poor and working class, so that's obviously not something I can relate to. But I am looking forward to reading through the series again, and hopefully like feeling better about it like from the beginning, instead of taking so long to like finally get into the book and the books and the characters fully, and really starting to love it. I was surprisingly moved by the last line of the final book, Betsy's Wedding. So anyway, Carney's House Party, which is one of the 3 spin-off books by the author Maud Hart Lovelace. I read this book in a single Shabbos, like not in like one sitting, but over the course of that one entire day. It was like so absolutely fantastic. I loved it so much. I wish there had been more books about Carney, and it was just like, really like exploring her thought process of like, if you've, read the main series, you already know like which dude she chooses to marry, but this actually takes you inside her mind and her like decisions, like, oh, should I marry my old high school boyfriend Larry, or should I go with this new guy Sam, who's like not really someone I'm thinking of like a potential boyfriend at first, but I'm really growing to like him and feeling he's a good match as time goes on. So you just like go into her mind and to see like, oh, how she made the decision she did, and like you can feel like this is totally the right decision for her and like for both of the guys when she makes her decision at the end. And I really did love this book. And I guess kind of another thing beyond the like not being able to relate to Betsy and her like life circumstances is because like I heard so much praise for these books going in, and so it was like really built up. And so when you've heard like nothing but the best, and it like doesn't measure up like perfectly like 1,000,000%, you're like, is this what all the fuss is about? And that's kind of unfair, because like sometimes when you go into like a book or a movie or a record album or whatever, like feeling like, oh, people are like trashing this, like for example like the Who's last 2 studio albums, Face Dances and It's Hard, like I really ended up liking them because people said they're such garbage, and like this wasn't really nearly as bad as everyone was saying, or when you like go in with a complete blank slate, so you don't know what to think one way or the other. But when like everyone has like built something up that kind of just like creates like an unfair thing in your mind, it's basically like competing against. And I'm sorry if I'm rambling, but I really did love this book, and I'm really looking forward to going back through and reading the entire series. Like hopefully I'll like have a much better like relationship with it from the jump, now that I've, gradually, like, it's grown on me and I've learned to love the books and the author. Number 7. I love this cover, but I didn't like this book. For this one, I thought of A Farewell to Arms by Ernest Hemingway. The book cover of the one which I read was, like, pretty interesting, like something that would make you think, oh, this is like a fun, exciting, grand World War I story, particularly because, I mean, obviously it was much different in those days, but today you really don't see, like, World War I represented very much in, like, film or literature or music. And back then it was basically in the forefront of everyone's mind. It was very, like, recent memory and history, but I really hated this book so much. I gave it like a 2-star review on my old Angel Fire site and my blog. I transferred the review over. Thankfully, a lot of my book reviews were able to be recovered after my site was unfortunately deleted without any warning, but that's a story for a whole other video and blog post. But anyway, I really did not like A Farewell to Arms. It was just so boring. I actually have liked most of pretty much all, as I remember correctly, of Ernest Hemingway's short stories, and I feel his Spartan prose really works well for the short form, but when it's stretched out over like 200 pages or more, it's just so, like, pulling teeth, like noun, verb, noun, noun, verb, noun, noun, verb, noun. I drank my 100th glass of vermouth that evening. Noun, verb, noun, noun, verb, noun. Like, I really do not get into that prose, and the way he draws women is just, like, so, like, shallow and two-dimensional. Like, Catherine is just like this little Barbie doll. Ooh, I love you. Do you love me? Do you love me, darling? Why don't we get married? Like, the only character I felt anything for was the baby, and that was only still for about 2 seconds. It was just, like, so freaking boring, and I'm really not looking forward to eventually, like, choking down another Hemingway novel. I mean, I guess I probably should at some point if I want to, like, really say I'm an educated person who has given a writer a second chance after such a disappointing first experience. But, I do really like his short stories, as I've mentioned, but it's just that, like, beyond Spartan noun, verb, noun, I drank another glass of vermouth, writing, like, prose, it really does not work when it's, like, stretched out over the longer form of a novel. Number 8. I don't like this cover, but I love this book, and I was originally, like, thinking of several different covers I could put down, particularly, like, just name about any, oh, look, my head is missing cover. That's one of my least favorite covers, and bonus points if it's, like, a headless, hairless, bare chest, and it has, like, a crotch close-up. That's, like, some of my least favorite cover trends all combined into one. Believe it or not, I actually have seen several book covers, like, doing all that at once. It's just, like, seriously. But for this one, I thought of absolutely one of my absolute favoriteest books, which I own 3 copies of. Unfortunately, and one of them is in storage, so I had to buy 2 more copies here. This is the Decameron. I really don't like this particular cover of it because this is the illustration of one of my least favorite stories in the book. It's like, I think probably, like, if I had to write them all down, like, less than 10 stories I really, really don't like and that haven't aged well. This is the 8th story of the 5th day, and the theme is love stories that, like, ended, like, sadly or, like, depressingly, or I mean, sorry, that began, like, without much hope of, like, success, like, sad, or, like, was only, like, unrequited love, but it ended happily with, like, marriage or becoming lovers. And I'm thinking, how is this a love story that ends happily? This jerk, I can't, like, use a stronger word because I don't like to really curse. Nastasio, he one day he see this, like, ghostly apparition of this, like, guy, a knight on a horse, and he's leading all these, like, wild, like, screaming, like, barking dogs after a naked woman. He's asking, like, what happened, and he's like, oh, this woman refused me marriage, and now, like, that we're both dead, I'm constantly chasing her at this place at this hour. And he's like, oh, maybe I can do that to get the woman I love and who doesn't like me at all to marry me. And so he has this lunch and everyone's sitting down, and suddenly this, like, ghostly knight comes through on a horse with all these, like, baying, like, wolfing dogs, like, chasing a hysterical, screaming naked woman, and some of the guys are trying to intervene and save the damsel in distress, and, like, he's saying, oh, look, this is what happened, don't try to stop it. And he tells the story, and the lady he likes is, like, so quiet, and she agrees to marry him because she's terrified, and, like, this dude threw his weight around and made this woman marry him who had no interest in him. That's, like, like, Stockholm syndrome. It's, like, gross, like, domestic, like, coercion, like, horrible things. But at least it's not the absolute worst story in the book. The worst is, like, hands down, like, the story where the moral is to learn to beat your wife so she'll never, like, act uppity or, like, contradict her husband's every word. That's just, like, a horrible, I can't find enough words to say how horrible that is. But, like, of the 100 stories in this absolute classic book by Giovanni Boccaccio in Italian literature, like, almost none of them are that bad. Like the vast majority, I would say, like, over 90 of the stories, they're, like, wonderful. They've held up. They're, funny. They're well written. I can't recommend them highly enough. And I know several of the Decameron stories practically by heart, including the most famously raunchy, dirty story, the 10th story of the third day. This is the other new translation I got of the Decameron after I had been moved out of New York State. Unfortunately, my original book translation I had bought is in storage, but that wasn't the original translation I read. That was from the Pittsfield, Massachusetts library. It was an old, I would guess, from the early 20th century, maybe late 19th century, with illustrations. That was also a really, really good translation and made me love the book. So obviously I really do like this cover a lot more than the cover of this one, because it's illustrating one of my least favorite stories in the entire book. So thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell. And I really, really do like seeing comments from you guys, because I genuinely want to become friends with more people on BookTube and AuthorTube, and the only way to do that is through like having conversations in the comments and figure out what you guys think of my videos and such. And I will be doing, I believe I have 2 more long belated tag videos to catch up to. Hopefully I will do that by the end of the year. And I thank you guys again very much for watching. I'll see you soon. Bye.